Nathan thought he'd seen it all. Life on a farm teaches you to expect the unexpected. Storms out of nowhere, a cow escaping through a hole you swear wasn't there yesterday, even the occasional wild animal making a surprise guest appearance in your chicken coop. But this was on a different level. He stood on his porch that morning, steaming coffee in hand, squinting out at the bizarre scene unfolding in front of him. A parade of middle-aged suburbanites, dressed like they were heading to a garden party at some overpriced winery, was strolling right through his farm. Pastel polos, sun hats so wide they could double as umbrellas, and shiny sneakers completely unsuited for actual dirt. They weren't just walking through either. They were stepping over his fences, trampling his rows of young crops, and, God help them, picking his tomatoes right off the vines, like they were on some sort of farm-themed field trip. Nathan blinked, then blinked again. No, it wasn't a hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. This was real, and leading the charge like some smug tour guide was Karen Whitmore. He should have known. Karen had been a pain in his side ever since she moved into the new subdivision that popped up half a mile down the road. The HOA president, self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, always with a complaint. The barn was an eyesore. The animals smelled. His fence clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. Never mind that his farm had been here long before their neatly trimmed lawns and cookie-cutter houses. Now here she was, flouncing through his property like she was hosting an open house. Karen's perfectly manicured hand waved lazily in the air, like she was showing off some historical site. "Oh, don't mind us, Nathan," she called out, finally spotting him on the porch. She gave him a quick little wave, like he was some underpaid groundskeeper and not the man who actually owned the land she was trespassing on. "We're just out for a little fresh air. Your land is so rustic." She said rustic, the way someone might describe a pothole-riddled road. Nathan took a slow, deep breath, fingers tightening around his mug. "Karen," he said, voice low and measured, "this is private property." "Oh, come now," she said, placing a hand on her chest like he'd offended her delicate sensibilities. "We're neighbors, and the HOA voted that we should have community access to all visually shared land." Nathan stared at her, letting that sentence settle in his mind. "You voted," he repeated, the words tasting like they had been pulled straight out of a dumpster. "Yes," she beamed. "We decided your farm adds to the scenic value of our community. So why not enjoy it? It's really for the good of everyone." Behind her, one of the HOA's faithful was adjusting her sunglasses, leaning against his fence like she was posing for a lifestyle magazine. Another guy was helping himself to strawberries from a crate Nathan had left by the barn. Nathan's jaw tightened. He set his coffee cup down on the porch railing, mostly because he was about 2 seconds from dropping it. "Did you just—" he started. "These are divine," the man interrupted, popping another berry into his mouth like it was an hors d'oeuvre at a catered event. "So much better than store-bought." Nathan felt a vein in his forehead start to twitch. He took another deep breath, his patience hanging by a thread. "You have 10 seconds, he said, his voice flat as a worn-out shovel blade, "to get off my land, or I'll let my dogs out." Karen's smile didn't even waver. If anything, she looked amused. "Nathan, be reasonable. This is a friendly visit. You can't be so territorial about a few acres of land." He glanced at those few acres, now dotted with suburban interlopers, tramping over lettuce rows and snapping selfies like they were at a tourist attraction. "You don't own this," he said, stepping down off his porch. "This isn't a park. It's my farm, my livelihood." Karen laughed like he'd told a joke she was too polite to explain was unfunny. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just land, Nathan." He gave a bitter little chuckle. "You're right. It is just land. My land. And if you think a bunch of HOA rulemakers can waltz onto my property and decide what happens here, you're about to learn a very interesting lesson." Karen's smile flickered, but only for a second. "Are you threatening me?" she asked, raising her chin. "I'm warning you," he said, calm as a cloudless sky before a storm. But Karen wasn't used to hearing no. She gave a huff, then turned back to her little group. "Let's not waste time arguing," she called. "Everyone, feel free to walk around and enjoy. Nathan's just being dramatic." The group cheered. One of them actually unpacked a picnic basket and started spreading out plates. Another unfolded a chair like they were settling in for a concert in the park. A woman laid out a checkered blanket and started unpacking cheese and crackers. Nathan's fist curled at his sides. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was entitlement. They weren't just ignoring him. They were acting like he didn't even exist. Fine. They wanted the farm experience. They were about to get it. He turned and headed for the barn, ignoring Karen's voice behind him, complaining to someone about how he was so unneighborly. Inside, two shadows shifted. Bear and Duke, his dogs. Bear, a massive wall of muscle with a bark that could scare the feathers off a hawk. Duke, faster, leaner, but just as mean when he needed to be. Nathan whistled low. Both dogs perked up immediately, ears snapping forward. "Go say hello," he murmured, unlatching the gate. They didn't need more encouragement. The screaming started before Nathan made it back outside. Pure chaos. Karen was running like her heels were on fire, screaming something about lawsuits. One guy tripped and face-planted in the dirt. Another cried out about his designer jeans being ruined. The picnic basket went flying, crackers and cheese raining down like confetti at the world's worst party. Nathan leaned against the porch railing, sipping his coffee with the satisfaction of a man who had finally had enough. "Have fun," he called out over the din. Bear and Duke didn't hurt anyone. They were trained better than that. But they ran through that group like wrecking balls covered in fur, chasing them toward the fences and back down the road. One woman tried to climb the fence but got stuck halfway, screaming for someone to help her down. Karen, covered in dirt, whipped around and pointed at Nathan with a trembling finger. "You'll regret this," she screeched. Nathan took another sip of coffee. Doubt it. And just like that, the HOA's grand field trip was over. Lesson learned, or so he thought. 2 mornings later, Nathan walked outside and nearly dropped his coffee. They were back. Karen and her merry band of HOA misfits were back. And this time, they doubled down. There were folding chairs. There was a full spread of food, champagne bottles chilling in silver buckets. Someone had dragged out a white lace tablecloth and set it up on a folding table that, Nathan was pretty sure, wasn't his. He just stood there for a second, staring. Maybe he was sleep-deprived. Maybe this was a stress dream. But no. Karen spotted him and lifted her mimosa like she was toasting him. "Oh, Nathan, there you are," she called. "Come join us. The croissants are divine." Nathan closed his eyes, counted to 5, opened them again. No change. "Karen," he said, calm as ever, "what are you doing?" She waved a hand like he was making a big fuss over nothing. "We didn't want our last visit to end badly, so we decided to try again. Nathan, you have so much land. It's selfish not to share." Nathan's gaze swept the area. One woman was nibbling brie, seated on what was very clearly his property. A man poured himself another glass of champagne, chatting away like they were at some exclusive vineyard. "So let me get this straight," Nathan said, his voice flat. "You were chased off my farm by 2 giant dogs, and your next thought was, let's do it again, but this time with mimosas?" Karen laughed like he was just adorable. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It was a misunderstanding." Nathan's hands curled into fists. "No," he said. "This is trespassing." Karen sighed. "Nathan, you're taking this way too seriously. We're not hurting anything." Nathan's gaze snapped to the man slicing into an apple. One of his apples, fresh picked off his tree. That was the last straw. He didn't say another word, just turned and walked toward the barn again. "Oh, there he goes," Karen said, rolling her eyes. "Off to pout." Nathan almost smiled. Almost. Bear and Duke were waiting. Ready. He whistled. Low. Sharp. They bolted like racehorses out of the gate. Chaos didn't begin to cover it. Karen shrieked and ran, tripping over a chair. The guy with the apple tossed it in the air like a sacrifice and bolted. One woman tried to scale the fence but slipped and landed in a puddle. Nathan leaned against the barn door, arms crossed. "Call them off!" Karen screamed, clutching her hat as Bear lunged past her. "Why?" Nathan called. "I thought you wanted to enjoy the land." "This isn't funny." "I disagree." Bear dragged the lace tablecloth across the dirt. Duke stole a champagne bottle and ran circles around one of the slower runners. Karen yanked off her heels and sprinted barefoot, swearing the whole way. All right, Karen finally shouted. We're leaving. Nathan gave a short whistle. Bear and Duke froze, panting but satisfied. Karen turned back, glaring at him like she wanted to kill him with her stare. You'll regret this, she hissed. Nathan smiled. Doubt it. And with that, they were gone again. Chairs abandoned, food scattered, tablecloths shredded. Duke pranced around with his stolen champagne like it was a trophy. Nathan sighed, scratching Bear behind the ears. Good boys, he murmured. And for a moment it seemed like peace had returned. Nathan thought that would be the end of it. After all, normal people would have seen the writing on the wall. They would have tucked tail and slunk back to their manicured lawns, telling themselves maybe they'd pushed too far. But Karen wasn't normal people. No, she was something different. Relentless, clueless, and annoyingly persistent. The human version of a mosquito buzzing in your ear on a humid summer night. 2 days later, Nathan's hope for peace was shattered by the thunk of something heavy landing in his mailbox. He pulled out a letter, stamped with the official HOA seal, and felt a slow grin tug at his mouth. He didn't even have to open it to know it was going to be good. Still, curiosity got the better of him. He slit the envelope open with his thumb and pulled out what had to be one of the most ridiculous things he'd ever read. Karen, now styling herself as the presiding representative of community safety, had filed a formal complaint against him, claiming that his dogs, his well-trained, not at all aggressive dogs, posed a threat to the community. Nathan laughed out loud, standing there in the driveway, a deep, hollow laugh that echoed off the barn walls. She was trying to flip the script. Trespassers become victims. Farmer becomes villain. Classic Karen. He tucked the letter into his back pocket, figuring it'd make good kindling later, and went about his day. But Nathan should have known better. Karen wasn't the type to let things drop after a strongly worded letter. Later that afternoon, Nathan spotted the white SUV pulling up to his front gate. It had that official-looking seal on the side, and he sighed, already knowing what was coming. Animal control. Sure enough, a middle-aged officer climbed out of the car, clipboard in hand, expression tired but polite. Afternoon, the officer said. We received a report about 2 aggressive dogs on the property. Just here to check things out. Nathan rested his forearm on the fence, casual as could be. Let me guess, he said. Blonde woman, designer sunglasses, voice that could peel paint? The officer gave him a look. So you've met, Nathan chuckled. She's hard to miss. The guy shook his head. You wouldn't believe how often we get these kinds of calls. HOA types who think they can control everything. Nathan gave a short whistle, and Bear and Duke came trotting out from the barn, tails wagging, looking about as dangerous as 2 oversized teddy bears. Duke, ever the charmer, dropped an empty champagne bottle at the officer's feet in an apparent offering. The man snorted. Yeah, real dangerous. He crouched to give Bear a scratch behind the ears, Bear leaning into it like a giant lapdog. They don't bother anyone who doesn't belong here, Nathan said, but they don't take kindly to uninvited guests. The officer straightened up, flipping his clipboard shut. From what I can see, these dogs aren't a problem. Well-trained, friendly. He glanced toward the subdivision in the distance. Sounds like a neighbor problem. Nathan liked this guy. So what happens now? The officer shrugged. I'll file it as an unfounded complaint, but if she keeps this up, you might want to consider filing a harassment report of your own. Nathan's grin was slow and sharp. Now there's a thought. As the SUV rolled back down the drive, Nathan was already turning the idea over in his mind. If Karen wanted to play games, fine, but he was going to play smarter. He gathered every shred of evidence he had, every minute of security footage, every trespass, every time Karen and her HOA crew turned his farm into their personal picnic ground. He organized it neatly, highlighted the laws they'd broken, and sent a copy straight to the HOA's legal department. By the next morning, it was no longer his problem. Turns out the rest of the HOA board wasn't thrilled to discover Karen had been leading unsanctioned invasions onto private property. Even worse, she'd opened them up to a lawsuit. A lawsuit Nathan would win in a heartbeat. He didn't even have to lift a finger. They took one look at the footage and threw Karen to the wolves. That afternoon, Karen herself showed up at Nathan's gate. She wasn't dressed for brunch this time. No sun hat, no flowery dress. She looked like someone who'd bitten into something sour and was still chewing it. Nathan took his time strolling out to meet her, arms folded, leaning against the fence like he had all the time in the world. "Karen," he greeted, voice light and amused. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" She exhaled sharply through her nose. "The HOA board has requested that I formally apologize." He lifted an eyebrow. "Requested?" Her jaw clenched. "Fine. They told me I had to." Nathan waited. She stared at him for a long second. "I apologize for overstepping." "Overstepping," Nathan repeated, testing the word like he was rolling a marble around in his mouth. Karen's eye twitched. "And for the complaints? And the false report? And for treating your land like a community space?" Nathan smiled. "That's a start." Her lips thinned into a line so tight it probably hurt. "The board also informed me that if I'm reported for harassment again, I'll be removed from my position." Nathan gave a long, low whistle. "Ouch! Tough break." "Don't push it," she snapped. He grinned. "Wouldn't dream of it." Without another word, she turned and stormed off, muttering under her breath. Nathan watched her go, the dogs flanking him like loyal bodyguards. He reached down, scratching behind Bear's ears. "Well, boy," he said, "I'd say that went pretty well." Duke let out a happy bark. Bear, ever the stoic one, gave a quiet huff of agreement, and for a while it really did seem like things had gone back to normal. Quiet mornings, long afternoons working the fields, the kind of peaceful solitude Nathan had chosen this life for in the first place. But people like Karen don't disappear. Not really. It was a few weeks later when Nathan saw her again. He was at the feed store, loading sacks of grain into his truck, when he spotted her SUV parked at the curb. Karen stood on the sidewalk talking to one of her HOA cronies. She glanced his way, and their eyes met. Her expression was neutral, too neutral, like she'd accepted her loss but wasn't finished plotting. Nathan shook his head and kept loading the feed. He wasn't worried. Whatever Karen was cooking up, he was ready for it. And then came the sign. It popped up on the edge of his property one morning, bright and shiny and absurd. A huge wooden billboard that read, "Future Site of Community Garden, sponsored by the Willow Creek HOA." Nathan stood there for a full minute, just staring at it. Then he walked over, ran his hand along the fresh paint, and laughed, long and loud. Because if Karen thought she could claim a chunk of his land by putting up a sign, she was dumber than he'd given her credit for. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture, then walked back to the barn and grabbed his toolbox. 10 minutes later, the sign was down. 5 minutes after that, it was chopped into neat firewood stacked by the shed. That evening, he sent a polite email to the HOA board, reminding them that his property lines were legally recorded and any further attempts at encroachment would be met with legal action. No one responded, but the next day Nathan saw Karen drive past his property without stopping. She didn't even look in his direction. After that, things stayed quiet. For real this time. The HOA found another project to obsess over, some sort of fountain they were installing at the neighborhood entrance. Karen kept her distance. And Nathan? He went back to doing what he loved. Planting, harvesting, walking the land that was his and his alone. Sometimes he'd spot Bear and Duke sitting on the hill, watching the road with those sharp, alert eyes. He figured they were waiting, just in case. But nothing happened. Karen was done. Nathan couldn't say he missed the drama. But he had to admit there was something satisfying about winning, about standing his ground and not letting anyone, no matter how entitled, take what was his. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in oranges and purples, Nathan sat on his porch with a fresh cup of coffee. Bear lay sprawled at his feet. Duke gnawed lazily on an old rope toy. He smiled to himself, listening to the quiet hum of crickets and the distant lowing of his cattle. Peace. Real peace. And as far as he was concerned, that was the best revenge of all. And somewhere out there, Karen was probably still seething. But she wouldn't dare cross that line again. Not after what happened last time. Nathan leaned back in his chair, tilting it on two legs, and let out a long breath. Life on the farm was back to normal. the way it was always meant to be, and it was better than any victory parade.